I'm Brendan Gulick. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. All right, let's address this just head on. Is Ohio State a legitimate national championship contender? I think it's a good question to ask because we've got enough of a sample size now with this team. If you have followed Ohio State with any sliver of attention throughout the course of the year, you are obviously well aware of how young this team is and how often that's been said. But by 5 weeks in, a lot of those young guys, or perhaps the better way to say it, the inexperienced players, those guys have a bunch of reps now. And you can see progression from where Ohio State was against Minnesota and Oregon to where they were these last 2 weeks. I am absolutely willing to acknowledge the talent gap between Ohio State and Akron. You saw that at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball all game long, especially on defense where Ohio State had 9 sacks and 12 tackles for loss. It might not show up statistically at the line of scrimmage against Rutgers because Noah Vedral did a good job of getting the ball out, but he was constantly under duress. The Buckeyes picked him off 3 times after he hadn't thrown an interception in 4 games. Obviously returned 1 for a touchdown. And the offense, when the first team group was out there, 7 possessions, they scored 7 times, including an early field goal. This team clearly is taking good strides forward. Without a sliver of a doubt, CJ Stroud had his best game as a Buckeye this past week. We'd seen little glimpses of what he could be in the first 4 games. I guess really for him, it was the first 3 games. Mm-hmm. But finally, he put it all together this past week with his shoulder, supposedly not bothering him anymore. There's reason to see some of this momentum despite the fact that the competition wasn't quite what you are hoping for these last 2 weeks. That said, I still stand by this. Rutgers is a better team than they've been in years past. I think Ohio State just played that well this weekend. You're going to play a Maryland team that is top 25 in the country in total offense. I know they're coming off of a miserable game, but the Buckeyes should win, you would think, fairly handily against Maryland and go into the bye. And then you're looking at a first half of the season where you could be 5-1, feeling really good, and you've got teams in front of you that you would have to necessarily knock off to get into the playoff. So are the Buckeyes on Alabama and Georgia's level? I don't think that's fair yet. But are the Buckeyes a legitimate national championship contender? Can they get to the college football playoff and make a run? I say yes. I think it's getting to that point where they can do it. After 2 weeks, I'm not sure I believed that. But after 5 games and seeing the improvement on this team, yeah, I think it is very possible.
Right, and you have to also kind of apply the scenario, right, of how essentially Ohio State would have to win a national championship, what they would have to do. So we're talking about you have to beat either Georgia or Alabama in the title game, but you don't have to beat both, right? Because those 2 teams are probably playing each other. So I think there's a scenario there where if you're saying like if Ohio State has to run through Georgia and Bama to win a title, the answer is no. The answer is unequivocally no. But to have to beat one of those teams, yeah, absolutely. And I think offensively, they certainly have the firepower to be able to do that. I think there's still some questions on defense that I think I would like to see at the very least partially answered before we even get to that time of the year. But I do think they're poised in a lot of ways to show the rest of the college football landscape essentially that the mistakes that were made in both the defeat to Oregon and then the rough game against Tulsa, that they're rectifying those, and then they beat everyone that they have to beat. And so I think you have to play well, obviously, the rest of the way. You have to smash the teams that you're supposed to smash. But it's, are they poised to be able to, kind of enter that conversation? Absolutely. In a lot of ways, I think they're in a better position than some of the unbeaten teams that sit in between them and Georgia, Bama.
Part of this transitions to our topic around the Big Ten here of, Iowa, Penn State, and Michigan. Are they for real? The good news for the Buckeyes is that they've got Penn State on their schedule in a few weeks. If things continue the way that Ohio State expects and the way the Big Ten is shaping up, you could very realistically see a Ohio State-Iowa game for the Big Ten championship. So, those two games could be de facto playoff elimination games.
Exactly.
And the same could be said for, a potential matchup with Michigan. So before we get more into the Big Ten side of things, I'll just keep this on Ohio State for a second. I think some of the changes that obviously needed to be made after the Oregon loss were, more on the scheme and the coaching side of things. And we've seen a guy like Ronnie Hickman, who has been a complete monster defensively. He's emerged as a great player. Look at Denzel Burke right now. I mean, if this kid isn't the best freshman cornerback in the country, I don't know who is. He's unbelievable. And I would be stunned at this point if he's not a freshman All-American. Bryson Shaw was pretty bad through the first two games. He's taken some really, really good steps forward these last three games now. Tommy Eichenberg got a ton of flack through the first 3 weeks. I thought Tommy Eichenberg has played better. Hopefully the injury to Cody Simon, whatever that injury is, the Buckeyes don't talk about those things. Hopefully it's not a serious injury. He's had to leave the last two games now. Cody Simon's obviously emerging as a good linebacker. What we've seen now from some of these interior defensive linemen is what you need to see if you're going to make a deep run. Haskell Garrett and Tyleik Williams in particular. Teron Vincent's playing a little bit better. You've obviously got good play so far from JTT and from Jack Sawyer on the edge, but Zach Harrison had a nice game. Javonte Jean-Baptiste had a nice game. So I do think we're seeing some noticeable improvements on the defensive side that are not just because of who you're playing. If you always judge yourself based on the level of competition, it's hard to get a real read on exactly where you're making progress and where you're not. But I do think the Buckeyes as a whole defensively are starting to play well enough that they can win the Big Ten. And if they win the Big Ten, they've got a really good chance to make the college football playoff even with one loss.
For sure. And I also think too, like what essentially what we're talking about on the defensive side of the ball is like, what does getting better look like when you roll out of bed and you're already better than the team that you're playing, And so for me, it's more of like an intangible thing. What's the intensity level? Are you maintaining that even though you're absolutely smashing a team? Are you taking opportunities to keep the pedal down? Is your energy level sustained at an extremely high level? Are you not making, are you not giving up, are you preventing chunk plays? Are you, forcing turnovers in scenarios that are probably like 50-50 kind of 50-50 plays, right? And I think Ohio State's done that now a lot over the last 2 weeks. And I think that shows me two things. One, I think it's rectified some of the problems that we saw schematically in Oregon. And I think as a byproduct of that, you're seeing guys with a lot more confidence. And I think Bryson Shaw is by far the best example of that. The other part too is, so you essentially fixed the scheme, and now guys are flying around and playing a lot more natural, right? And what does that defense look like, when guys are both confident and free? The other thing too is that now you're starting to see the next step beyond what happens with confidence. And that is the belief that you can always kind of find an extra gear. And that extra gear is a lot of times we're talking about like maybe 5 or 10% more effort, 5 or 10%, a little bit more intensity. That gap is like the gap between, say, like Bama, Georgia, and everyone else, right? So if you don't have 11 5-star guys out on the field, that's fine. If you're able to maintain that 5 or 10% more of an intensity level, you're maybe able to rise above, say, your potential or like what would be like your floor, right? So that's huge. I think, and I think we've seen that. I think it would be unfair to say that like, okay, now we've checked that box. Let's now Ohio State's is good, and winning a title is definitely a possibility. I think that's probably disingenuous, but so there's obviously a lot more that you want to see. But what they've done, and which is not an easy thing to do, by the way. What they've been able to do these last 2 weeks by changing a lot of different things is schematically has really shown up on the field. And I think you're seeing from a body language standpoint, the players are really eating that up and feeling exceptionally confident. And that's only a good thing for Ohio State.